In the red heart of Western Australia, 1,000 miles from anywhere, there is a town that the government has taken off the map. Not let fail, not let empty out. Taken off. Gazetted. Its name lifted from the road signs and the maps by an act of the state. This is what it looked like when it was alive. The Pilbara. Iron red hills, a gorge cut deep into the range, and on an ordinary afternoon, a hard white sun standing over a busy outback town. The biggest town for hundreds of miles. A hotel, a store, a school, a hospital. Streets of fibro houses and demountables laid out on the flat below the gorge. And the roads are the wrong color. They are pale. A soft blue-gray running between the red houses on the red earth. The town paved them that way. The paths, the car park, the driveways, the airstrip, the racecourse. All of it graded flat with a fine blue-gray crushed rock, trucked down free from the mill up the gorge. Because it lays the red dust and it costs nothing. The children are playing in it. In the schoolyard, in the sandpits, on the racecourse, kicking up a fine glitter that hangs in the light. One of them leaves a small bare footprint in the blue at the edge of the yard. The blue-gray dust is crocidolite, blue asbestos, the sharpest, most lethal fiber ever mined. And here is the thing to hold on to. This was never a secret. Before this town was even put on the map, a doctor wrote to the state's own health authorities and told him, in writing, that this mine would produce, his words, the richest and most lethal crop of asbestosis cases. They filed the letter. They kept mining for 18 more years. The town is called Wittenoom. Let us start on the afternoon. It was still busy with the children in the blue. So let us go down into the town while it is still there. By the middle of the 1950s, Wittenoom is the largest town in the Pilbara. Hundreds of miles of red country in every direction, and this is the place with the lights on. And it is not a camp. It is a town built to be lived in. The company and the government between them put up a hospital, a school, a police station, a post office, churches, a general store, a butcher, a bakery, a cafe, a library, a hotel, where the beer had come a very long way to get there and was the better for it, and an open-air picture theater where you sat out under the desert stars and watched the film with the warm night all around you. There is a single men's quarters for the workers off the boat and the truck, and streets of houses for the families laid out on the flat below the gorge. On a Saturday there is racing. The town graded itself a race course out on the flat and ran horses on it. And when the heat came down hard, as it does out there was the gorge, because the gorge is beautiful. That is the part nobody expects. Iron red walls a long way up, and down in the shade of them, cool green pools of permanent water. People swam in them. On a hot afternoon you drove up the gorge, and you got in the water under those red walls, and there were few finer places in the country to be. This was a good posting. The money was better than a man could earn down south. A family could get ahead here in a way it could not anywhere else. Some 20,000 people came through over the working life of the town. Never all at once. At its very peak, the census counted 881. But they kept coming for the wage and the sunshine and the start. All of it. The picture theater, the race course, the streets of houses, the walk to the store. All of it was laid out on those same pale blue-gray roads. They did not know. For the people living it, this was simply a good town, a long way out, doing well. A town getting ahead in the red country, with the pictures on under the stars. There is no single terrible night in this story. That is the first thing that makes it different. No dam, no wave, no 4 minutes. The disaster is the town, every ordinary day of it. Up the gorge, the mine and the mill run through crocidolite ore, and the fiber goes everywhere. Into the mill air, thick enough that men worked in a fog of it. Down onto the trucks, into the tailings heaped beside the road, and the tailings come down into the town and get raked into the schoolyard and the driveways and dry and lift again on the wind. Crocidolite is not like the gray asbestos in old ceilings. It is finer. Its fibers are sharper and thinner, and once they are breathed in, the body cannot clear them. They lodge in the lungs and they stay, and then they wait. This is the cruelty of it. The dust does nothing you can see. A man works a shift in the mill, or a child plays a summer in the yard and walks away well. The disease, asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma, the cancer that only asbestos makes, does not arrive for 20 years, sometimes 30, sometimes 40. So the town went on for years feeling fine. A fine feeling is not the same as a safe one. The fuse was already lit. It was just very long. Before any of this, there was the country. Long before the mill, before the town, before the gorge had a name a mapmaker would recognize, this was a living place. It is called Wittenoom now, after a settler who ran cattle here. But it was old ground long before him. Iron red walls cut deep into the range, and down in the shade of them water. Permanent water holes, in a country where water is the whole difference between life and nothing. This is Benjima country. It has been on the reckoning of the people themselves for tens of thousands of years. They knew these gorges, where the water sat through the dry, which walls held the shade, and the blue asbestos was in these ranges the whole while. It sat in the rock and it harmed no one, because no one ground it into dust and breathed it in. Then, in the space of a few decades, that changed. The gorge was opened, the rock was crushed, the dust was raked across the ground and washed into the water. A country that had been lived in and looked after for tens of thousands of years was turned, in one working lifetime, into the most poisoned ground in the southern hemisphere. Nobody asked the people whose country it was. Here is how Wittenoom was told at the time. A model company town in the outback. Work for any man who wanted it. Good money, a long way from the cities, in the service of a mineral the whole modern world was buying. The company was Australian Blue Asbestos, a subsidiary of one of the country's oldest and largest firms, Colonial Sugar Refining, CSR. They took over the Wittenoom Gorge operation in the early 1940s, built the town, and gazetted it in 1950. Through that decade, it was the Pilbara's largest town, and the only source of blue asbestos in Australia. The recruitment posters sold sunshine and wages. Families came. Some 20,000 people would pass through the town over its working life. Not 20,000 at once. The town itself was never large. At its peak census, in 1961, about 880 people lived there. But over the years, 20,000 came and went. And the dust was just dust. Something in the air of a mining town. Nothing a working man needed to worry about. The mine ran until the 30th of December, 1966. And then it closed. Not because it was killing people, because it had stopped making enough money. Blue asbestos was falling out of favor and the operation was no longer profitable. So CSR shut it and moved on. That is the useful part of the story. If a mine closes for money, then nothing was ever wrong with it. It just ran its course. The trouble with that story is the paper. Because the danger had been written down, dated, named, and filed from almost the very beginning. His name was Eric Saint. He was the district medical officer for the Northwest, based up on the coast at Port Hedland, covering an enormous stretch of country by aeroplane with the Royal Flying Doctor Service. In 1948, he came into the Wittenoom operation and looked at how it ran. This is before the town was gazetted, before most of the families arrived. 18 years before the mine would close, he saw a mill grinding blue asbestos with, in the words that came down, no dust extraction of any kind. Men working in it. Fiber everywhere. And Eric Saint sat down and wrote to Dr. Cecil Cook, the Commissioner of Public Health of Western Australia, the state's own senior health official. He did not hedge. He wrote that within, quote, a year or two, the mine would produce, quote, the richest and most lethal crop of asbestosis cases in the world's literature. The richest and most lethal crop in the world's literature. A doctor, standing in the mill in 1948, telling the government in writing that this exact place was about to become the worst on record. He was not guessing at a mechanism the way an engineer guesses at a slope. He was a physician describing a certainty. He spoke to the mine's management directly as well. By the accounts that survived, they listened politely and made no commitment. The letter went to the Commissioner of Public Health, and nothing changed. The mill kept grinding. The town went up around it. The children arrived, and the blue dust went into the schoolyard. The warning was not missing. It was on file in the government of Western Australia from before the town began. While that letter sat in its drawer, the town was advertising. Not quietly. Wittenoom was sold. There was a machine for it. Brochures, posters, notices in the papers of the southern cities, and further off, in the towns of a Europe still digging out of the war. Sunshine, a wage a working man could not earn anywhere else. A house, a school, a hospital, a picture theater, all the way out in the red country. A new start, at the top of the map. And families answered. They came up the long road or flew in over the ranges with their furniture and their children. Men signed on for the mill. Wives set up house on the blue-gray streets. Children were walked to the school beside the yard. Here is the part to sit with. The same government that held Eric Saint's letter, the letter that named this exact place as the coming worst on record, did nothing to keep the families away. The warning was on file in one office. The town was being advertised out of another. Nobody who stepped off that road was shown the letter. They were shown the brochure, and the brochure did not mention the dust. The families who answered did not all come from the southern cities. A great many came from much further off. After the war, Australia wanted workers, and Europe had men with nowhere left to work. So the recruiting reached across a broken continent, into Italy above all, and into the towns and villages the war had emptied out. They came on what was called assisted passage. The fare paid for them or lent to them on one condition. They signed a contract to work where they were sent for 2 years before they were free to go. The largest single group at Wittenoom were Italians, something near 1,100 of them across the years, men who had crossed the world for a wage and a house and a start. And the place they were sent was the mill in the gorge. Look at what the contract meant on that ground. A man from a village in Italy steps off the truck into the red dust with a paper that says he owes 2 years. The air in the mill is the worst air in the country. He does not know that. Nobody tells him that. He knows the wage is good, and the paper says stay, so he stays. He breathes it. He sends for his wife and his children. The ones who took in the most of the blue dust were often the newest, the men with the least English, the least choice, and the most to prove. They had come the furthest of anyone to reach the most dangerous ground in Australia, and the contract held them on it. A man who has borrowed his passage across the world and sent for his family on the strength of it does not walk off the job in the first bad week. The paper said stay, and the dust did the rest. And Saint's letter was not the end of it. It was the beginning of a pattern. Over the years that followed, the dust in the mill was measured. The readings came back at 6 to 8 times the level then considered tolerable. Not once, repeatedly over years. Management was told. The numbers were on the page, and the conditions did not improve. The company understood what those numbers meant. From the company's own records later produced in court, it is clear that CSR knew that running the mine in that dust made asbestosis and cancer, in the language of the day, extremely likely. They knew, and they kept the mill running. This is the difference between an accident and a decision. An accident is a thing nobody saw coming. A decision is a thing you make again every quarter with the readings in front of you. Wittenoom was a decision, taken over and over for 18 years. The dust was measured. The doctor had written. The company had the facts, and the blue tailings kept coming down the gorge into the town. The warnings kept climbing. In September 1961, a specialist put it in writing to CSR's own consulting doctor. From the company's records, later produced in court, he said it would be, quote, much more satisfactory if the company itself took the necessary action, and expressed his disbelief that a reputable public company could remain in what he called its self-satisfied state and, quote, continue to allow the asbestos mining industry to go on killing men. Going on killing men, written to the company's own doctor in 1961. A year later, it reached the top. In 1962, the poor conditions and the excessive dust at Wittenoom were raised with the Premier and Cabinet of Western Australia. And there, too, nothing was done. The reason reported is the plainest one in this whole story. CSR is said to have made it known that if it were forced to spend on further safety, it would close the mine. So the state let it be. Line them up. 1948. A flying doctor to the Commissioner of Public Health. The dust, measured for years at many times the limit. The company's own knowledge. 1961. A specialist naming an industry that goes on killing men. 1962. The Premier and Cabinet. 5 ways of knowing. 5 ways of not acting. The danger was never in doubt. It was documented at every level, from a health department letter to the cabinet room. And it was buried under the profit of the only blue asbestos mine in the country. When the mine closed at the end of 1966, the danger did not close with it. The mill fell quiet. The company left, but the town stayed, and the tailings stayed. Hundreds of thousands of tons of crushed blue asbestos raked into the roads and the paths and the car parks and the race course and the driveways and the schoolyard. It did not go anywhere. Families kept living there. The population thinned, but it did not vanish. Through the 1970s, around 100 people still lived in Wittenoom among the blue dust on the blue roads. Children were still raised there, and every dry, windy day, the tailings lifted off the ground and hung in the air again. The mine had a fixed end. The 30th of December, 1966. The exposure did not. It went on in the ordinary streets of a town that was allowed to keep standing on top of the deadliest tailings in the country. The company had gone. The warning had been filed and forgotten, and the ground itself kept working. Eric Saint had written a year or two. He was wrong about the clock. He was right about everything else. The fuse was longer than he guessed, but it was lit exactly where he said it was. In 1962, a doctor named Jim McNulty, working for the state, diagnosed the first case of mesothelioma in Australia in a man who had worked the gorge. The very department that had filed Saint's letter began, one case at a time, to watch it come true. A warning that files itself and then comes true is the worst kind there is, because every step between the writing of it and the proving of it was a step that somebody could have stopped, and did not. The mill was quiet by now. The company had gone. The gorge sat empty in the sun, and in a filing cabinet in Perth, a letter from 1948 was being proved correct, line by line, by the men who had breathed the dust. The men did not leave the dust at the mill. They wore it home. A shift in that fog packed the fiber into everything a man had on: his shirt, his trousers, the cuffs, the seams, his hair. He walked back down into the town wearing it. And in the evening, in a small closed kitchen, someone shook those clothes out and washed them. That was the wife. She never went up the gorge. She never worked a shift in the mill. She kept the house on the blue-gray street. And every evening she beat the red and the blue out of her husband's work clothes and breathed what came off them. The dust does not know whose lungs it is in. It took the man who shoveled it and the woman who laundered it by exactly the same door, and it did not stop at the washing line. A child carried in against a dusted shirt, sat on a knee still gray from the mill, breathed it too, at home, off the cloth, before ever reaching the schoolyard. This is the part with no boundary. A mine you can fence, a mill you can close and lock. Dust that comes home in the clothes goes everywhere a family goes. So the disease, when it came, did not only take the workers. It took people who never once saw the inside of the mill, who had only kept house for someone who had. The pay envelope carried one name. The dust could not read the envelope. The mine kept a record of the men on its books. It kept no record of the women bent over the wash tub, or the babies carried in from the yard. They were never counted as exposed, because they were never counted as workers. But the fiber had been in the house the whole time, in the seams of a shirt on a hook by the door. Here is what the blue dust did over the decades that followed. More than 2,000 people who worked or lived at Wittenoom have died of asbestos-related disease: mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer. More than 2,000 out of the roughly 20,000 who passed through the town over its working life, and that is not a final number, it is a floor. More than 2,000 is what is firmly on the record. Counts of everyone the blue dust is thought to have killed run higher toward 4,000. Because the fuse is so long, the deaths did not come all at once. They came, and they are still coming 20, 30, 40 years after the exposure. People are still being diagnosed now, in their 60s and 70s, from dust they breathed as young workers. And some of them never worked the mine at all. They were children. They played in the schoolyard and the sand pits and on the racecourse. In the blue dust, their parents raked flat to keep the red dirt down. The small bare footprint in the blue at the edge of the yard, that was one of them. Researchers who followed the children of Wittenoom found the disease coming for them too, decades on. People whose only exposure was a childhood in that town. It is widely regarded by its death toll as Australia's worst industrial disaster. Not one terrible night, a whole town over a whole lifetime. And unlike a wave or a collapse, this one has no morning after. The count does not close. Every year, the blue dust that was raked into that schoolyard adds another name. They could not undo that. So they did the only thing that was left. Asbestos killed in a great many places. This was never the only one. It killed in the shipyards, and the factories, and the building trades on 3 continents. So what makes this town the one so often called the worst? It is not the number alone, though the number is terrible. It is where the danger was put. Everywhere else, the asbestos was at the place of work. A man clocked on, breathed it through his shift, and clocked off at a gate. However little he was told of the risk, the danger had a boundary and a working day. It stopped, in theory, at the fence. At Wittenoom there was no fence and no clock. The waste was not kept to the mill. It was raked out across the whole town. The paths, the yards, the ground an ordinary life was lived on, every hour of every day. Other places let the danger out through a factory gate at the end of a shift. This one built it into the ground people came home to. There are worse numbers somewhere in the long history of asbestos. There is no worse idea than raking it into the ground the town lived on. The company thought it had walked away clean. It had closed the mine for money, kept its records, moved on to other business. But the people the dust had marked did not let it go. As the disease surfaced, the survivors and the families of the dead began to sue. Not the government, the company. Australian Blue Asbestos and its parent, CSR, and the renamed subsidiary that had been left holding the liability. And this is where the paper came back. Because to fight a case like this, the company's own files have to be opened. The dust readings, the memos, the letters that had been so carefully filed and so carefully forgotten. Everything that had sat in those drawers for decades was pulled out, hundreds of documents, one exhibit at a time, stamped and read aloud in a courtroom. The 1948 warning, the readings at 6 to 8 times the limit, the specialist who had written of an industry going on killing men. The company had kept all of it. That was the mistake. It had documented its own foreknowledge in writing, and then archived it, and the archive became the case against it. The courts found against the company. Damages were awarded, including damages meant to punish, and a judge found that the danger had been known for decades. The warning that had been filed to be ignored was read back, in open court, to the men who had filed it. It only took 40 years, and the dead, to make them listen. The state could not raise the dead, and it could not clean the gorge. Cleaning it was, and is, beyond any budget yet found. So it began, instead, to remove the town. The buildings came down in waves, a major demolition program in 1987, another through the mid-1990s. Most of the town was pulled down while some of its people were still living in it. Then, in 2006, the government moved to end Wittenoom as a place at all. It announced it would strip the town of its official status, and it cut the power. The electricity was disconnected. The town that had lit the Pilbara night for half a century went dark, by decision, from a switch far away. No wave did this, no mountain, no flood. A government did it, on paper, deliberately. The first thing you do to unmake a town is turn off its lights. They could pull the town down in a season. The disease keeps a longer calendar. Remember the fuse, 20 years, 30, 40. A man could work the mill as a young fellow in the 1950s, walk away well, live a whole other life 1,000 miles from the gorge, and be told, in his 70s, that the dust he had forgotten had been waiting the entire time. The exposure ended when the mine closed. At the end of 1966, the dying did not even begin to peak until decades after that. While the bulldozers were taking the buildings down through the 80s, the 90s, and past 2000, the disease was still working through people who had left the town as children. The demolition had a schedule. It could be finished in months. The disease had a schedule too, and no machine could bring it forward or hold it back. So here is the strange arithmetic of Wittenoom. The town was struck off the map years before the last of its dead had even been diagnosed. People were still being told they were dying of Wittenoom long after Wittenoom as a place had ceased to exist. A place can be erased in an afternoon. A poison with a 40-year fuse cannot. Because mesothelioma can take 30, 40, even 50 years to surface, people exposed in the town as children are still being diagnosed today. The doctors who follow it say the toll has not finished arriving, that the cases will keep coming for years yet. The buildings came down on a timetable. The dust keeps its own, and it is not finished yet. Then they took the name off the map. In June 2007, the town site of Wittenoom was officially de-gazetted, its legal existence as a town revoked, and its name was removed from the official maps of Western Australia and from the road signs. Think about what that means, literally. A driver on the highway who used to see a sign to Wittenoom now sees nothing. The turnoff is still there, the road is still there, the name is gone. The following January in 2008, Wittenoom was formally declared a contaminated site under the state's law. The local shire was empowered to close the roads leading into the poisoned country. A town that had been the Pilbara's largest, gazetted with ceremony in 1950, was ungazetted, unnamed, and closed off. This is the thing this channel looks for, and here it is at its purest. Not a town that faded from the map, a town the government reached out and rubbed off it. The lights off, the name gone, the road shut. But a handful of people were still living inside the blank space. Here is the thing the closed roads could not fix. The name was off the map. The signs warned of asbestos. The shire had closed the roads into the poisoned country, and still people came. A place that has been rubbed off the map is a place people want to see. The blank space is itself an invitation. They drove in past the warnings, around the gates, up the old tracks, to stand in a town that officially did not exist. Some came for the gorge, which is, in truth, one of the most beautiful in the country. Some came for the strangeness of a deleted town, and the signs had to say something more than danger. They had to warn people, in as many words, not to pick up the blue-gray dust, not to carry the tailings away, not to take a piece of a poisoned town home with them. Sit with what it means that the sign had to say that, because the dust that had killed a town was still lying on the ground, exactly where it had always been. You could bend down and touch it. A sign can say danger. It cannot make a curious hand believe it, not when the danger looks like nothing worse than pale gravel, glittering a little in the sun. The state had sealed the roads and taken down the name. But the poison it could not lift sat there in the open, unfenced, still catching the light. The state was thorough about the name of the place, off the maps, off the signs, struck out of the Gazette. But there was one record it did not keep and could not erase because it never held it: the names of the people. Those were kept by the people themselves. Out of Wittenoom came a society of the sick and the bereaved, former workers and widows, and the grown children of the town who did the counting the state would not. They keep the record, not of a place, of people. Every name the blue dust is known to have taken, written down, and added to, year on year. While the government worked to make Wittenoom disappear, they worked to make sure the dead did not. The state's records of the place are all closed now, struck through, finished, filed away. This one has no last page. A name written into it by a widow or a son was never the state's to hold, and is not the state's to strike out. So in a plain suburban office, a list nobody official ever asked for is still kept by hand, and still added to, quietly, year after year. They counted the town out of existence. Somebody else keeps counting its dead. If would you do water looked, a few would not leave. Their homes were there, their lives were there. Some had lived in Wittenoom their whole lives, and did not accept that a Gazette notice could unmake the place. The count of them fell year by year. 6 holdouts in 2015, 4 in 2017, 3 the year after. 2 by 2021, so the state made it law. In March 2022, the Wittenoom closure bill was passed, allowing the government to compulsorily acquire and demolish the last privately owned properties in the town. The last resident left in September 2022, leaving no permanent residents at all. And from around May 2023, the government demolished what still stood. The buildings that had survived the earlier waves, the last homes of the last holdouts, pulled down. What is left now is slabs, bleached concrete pads on red dirt, where a hotel and a store and a school and a hospital and 800 people's houses used to be. The town is a set of foundations in the desert, inside a blank space on the map, behind a locked gate. The one deleting the town did not clean the country. The asbestos is still there, in the gorge, in the tailings heaps. Raked into ground that no bulldozer touched, the contaminated zone covers 46,840 hectares, described as the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere. You can take the name off the map. The fiber stays in the dirt. And the country was never empty to begin with. This is Banjima land. The traditional owners were here long before the mine, and the poison was poured across their country without their leave. In February 2026, the Banjima traditional owners went to the federal court, seeking around $1.5 billion to seal the mines, remove the tailings, demolish what remains, and clean the waterways. Nearly 80 years after a flying doctor first wrote his letter, the reckoning is still open, in a courtroom, over a place that officially no longer exists. So here is what is left of Wittenoom. No power, no name on the map, no name on the road signs, no residents. A locked gate and a field of bleached slabs in the red dirt. The state did a thorough job. It took away almost everything a town can be taken away from. The buildings, the lights, the address, the word itself. But it started too late, and it worked on the wrong thing. Because the disaster was never the town. The disaster was the dust. And the dust was breathed, and the fiber is in the lungs of people who are still alive and still being diagnosed all over the country, decades after they left. You can bulldoze a hotel. You cannot bulldoze a mesothelioma. The warning was written down in 1948 and filed. The town was poisoned for the whole of its life. And when it could not be undone, the state deleted the address. They took Wittenoom off the map. The map was the only part they could reach. The dying goes on without it.